welcome to episode 262 of Cinematary. I am your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Dylan Moore.
And today we are joined by a very special guest. She writes the blog Woman in Revolt. Lindsay Pugh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Happy to be here.
So, in part one, we're going to be talking about movies that we saw this week. And then in part two, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 19... I don't know why I didn't just pull this up to look at it at this moment. 1970s Wanda, which is the... I will link to Lindsay's article on the film in the description, but I'm really excited to chat with you about this. It seems like, at least when you had written that first piece, that this was kind of the first time you had saw the film and seemed to have a very visceral reaction immediately writing a bunch of stuff down and writing your thoughts about it. So I'm excited. Please stick around, guys, for part two to listen to that chat. We got some good stuff on the site, though, before we jump in. We have reviews of Charlie Says. We have reviews of Ready or Not and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And then for those who have not signed up for our Patreon, you would probably want to right now, because we have our second film theory and chill. We talked about Peter Wallen's The Auteur Theory and look at it kind of... Peter Wallen kind of wrote in the middle of Andrew Sarris, and I feel like what the auteur theory has kind of become today, and we chat about that and the various examples that they give in that essay, as well as some of our own, and then naturally some bong hits happened, and we chill for a good 30 to 40 minutes and talk about random stuff. But let's go ahead. That's what happens. That's what happens. It's just what happens.
Thoroughly chilled.
Let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week.
Okay,
Dylan, I'm going to kick it off with you. You wanted to talk about a couple Jodie Mack films, which were all released on Vimeo recently.
Yeah. I'm sure there was ways to see it before. I think most of the time, Fandor usually has a lot of her stuff, and maybe Odds and Ends on YouTube. But recently, and I think when I say recently, like in the past couple of weeks, I think that Jodie Mack herself just decided to upload a lot of her older shorts onto Vimeo, and so that was exciting to see. The two that I particularly want to talk about, or that I've watched recently, still fresh on the mind, is called Persian Pickles and Glistening Thrills. Persian Pickles more or less follows her like thematic through line in her work of a lot of stop motion collage work with fabric, and in this case it seems like a lot of rugs and that nature. But what she eventually ends up doing with Grand Bazaar of like trying to find like languages and patterns in fabric, it kind of comes in this like 3-minute type package where as usual, just the strobe effect of like slowly like making these fabrics come alive with movement. In this case, with rather pickle shapes and teardrops, and is very funny and goofy. But on the soundtrack of it, it almost sounds like satellites that get like pointed into space to try to pick up alien transmissions, and it all comes in with like cosmic static, right? So it's kind of like that, but slowly over time it feels like it's actually like a meaning and a language that's coming through from the fabric and the soundtrack itself. And I mean, that's like an extreme like goofy example of what she ends up trying to do later in Grand Bazaar that came out this year. Mm-hmm. Particularly like trying to find the language and patterns and making this wild whatever galaxy brain like connection between making fabrics having a life of their own, and rugs just being transported under like the grand supply chain of economics, and so that's like the far extrapolation that she's like taken it most recently. But here is just like a nugget of it that was really fun to watch, and it's like 3 minutes. And the other one is such a low-key difference. It's called Glistening Thrills. And it starts off like very, very abstract, where it's just kind of lights coming through and you can't really tell where they're coming from. And it's like little shards just kind of like cutting through this dark background. and it's over this really like relaxing vibraphone and crystal playing, filling up crystal glass and playing it. It is like the most relaxing 8 minutes, but it keeps going and like building from like very specific up close, like abstracted light to where you find out that it's all these kind of like light fixtures, like these mobiles that it looks like she built, that have this holographic sheen on each of them. And she just keeps playing with that theme. And at a certain point, it gets like disturbingly beautiful, even after the fact that you know what it is. Like you've seen the mobiles that she must be using to make the images after. And I almost, it's really hard to describe easily that feeling, but it's surprising going from one to the other and just how beautiful it is. So those two, I watched recently and would recommend. And, I've just been slowly making my way through, the stuff that she's posted recently. I don't know if we've directly talked about her work on the podcast. I know Michael and Andrew have written up about, Let the Light In, for Big Ears.
They talked about a couple of hers that played at Big Ears, and then Andrew saw the Grand Bazaar at TIFF last year, as well as
that's right.
One of her shorts that played in the Wavelengths program.
Yeah, so that's really cool. So I just kind of wanted to add into that and just definitely point out that she has a lot of her work on Vimeo now. Maybe check it out because they're really fun to see how she slowly ends up building onto those themes of work. So.
Very cool. I mean, and they're all pretty, like, if you have never watched any of Jodie Mack's stuff, they're relatively accessible, kind of starters.
Yeah, probably the ones that are like 3 minutes, particularly if you don't generally care about kind of short, like, experimental work, that a lot of the 3-minute collages ones do well. I mean, I wholeheartedly could watch Glistening Thrills. It might be 8 minutes, but it'll completely entrance you as you watch it. My only caveat is for photosensitivity and some strobe-like effects, where if you're photosensitive like that, you might want to gauge whether or not you want to watch some of them. They're not all quite like that, but I know some of her work, because of its intensity and using the strobe effect to create that illusion of movement, that it could be a lot. So yeah, just as a warning, but still recommend the vast majority of it because it's not all quite that intense or all quite like that. So, and right, to point out, her musical parody of The Dark Side of the Moon with her mom and posters, it's not up there, sadly. I would still recommend trying to find a way to watch that, but her earlier version of musical is Yard Work is Hard Work, where it's about how difficult yard work and housekeeping is, and it's pretty cute and funny, and includes a lot of live action and a lot of the character collage work too. So, and that's like on the other end of what she messes around with and plays with in her work. So that's fun.
Neat. I saw, I forgot what the name of it is, so I apologize, but it was one where she had like this, I forgot what the form specifically was, but she had like this, it was a kind of a stop motion thing where there was the form in the middle. I think she was like creating like an art piece, and like it was like the stop motion effect of her like creating it, and it was kind of like you were talking about. It was like this very transfixing, like you just got sucked into watching like the movements and the sway of everything. I really
it was. I think, that one was included. So I was able to watch Grand Bazaar too because Public Cinema played it in Knoxville, and I was able to drive down to catch it. They just had like an installation and they put up with it. And yeah, I think that one's the Hoarders Without Borders, where it's all the rock exhibits, right? Where it's just like this incredibly fast hand movement as they place different objects in the center of it, and it's very strange and silly. And so those two were playing together. So yeah, that's very silly version of it. Because after a while, it like includes things like markers and signs and things just all the things that could be even potentially included in the office work of rock collecting. So, but generally, blanket statement would endorse her work, just with the photosensitivity warning. So,
Oh, very cool. Well, again, we can put those links in there, but
yeah,
I guess that stuff is available on Vimeo. So the one I wanted to talk about real quickly is the Peanut Butter Falcon. The Peanut Butter Falcon is the first film by Tyler Nilson and Michael Schwartz. It kicked off, I think it premiered at South by Southwest, and it stars Shia LaBeouf, Dakota Johnson, and Bruce Dern, John Hawkes, and John Barenthal, which I don't know what that guy did, but this poor man has to like constantly, like, he's just showing up in stuff and only showing up in stuff for like 5 seconds. No, I feel bad for John Barenthal because I've seen him in a lot of movies where he doesn't get to say anything and he just gets to kind of show his face for 5 seconds. I mean, in the entirety of this movie, he's just like in flashback sequences because he plays the older brother of Shia LaBeouf's character. And I'm just saying, I really like him as an actor. He does great stuff. Like, let's give him roles that require him to actually act instead of just showing up in the background or showing up in flashbacks. I mean, in Widows, he is killed in the first 5 minutes. So sorry, spoiler alert, but he doesn't last very long, and you're just like, oh, John Barenthal's gone. Anyway, so the Peanut Butter Falcon, the story, you have this man with Down syndrome played by Zach Gotagson. He wants to go to this professional wrestling school in rural North Carolina, but due to his condition, he is living at a retirement home under the watchful eye of Dakota Johnson's character, Eleanor. But he breaks out, and when he breaks out, he ends up running into a fisherman played by Shia LaBeouf, who is kind of on the lam trying to hide from these guys who he has gotten into multiple skiffs with, including burning down a lot of their equipment after they beat him up for stealing their crabs. And so the two of them, Shia LaBeouf is heading... It's Scuffs and Skiffs. That's what it is. That's what they should have called the movie. And so Shia LaBeouf's character, Tyler, is trying to head down to Florida and finally agrees to take Zach along with him in order to drop him off at this wrestling school. It's a sweet movie. You know, a lot of it is just... It kind of builds itself as this this Southern tale, this kind of Mark Twain-esque story of these two guys on the river making their way through. This was filmed in Savannah, where I live at the moment, and it kind of shows off all of the gorgeous marshes and waterways that you can find outside of the city. And so, just kind of watching them explore the area and continue to kind of grow their friendship is really nice. I think that LaBeouf kind of gets this bad rap because people aren't really sure what to make of him, or they completely dismiss him. But he gives this very genuine performance in this. I think that all of the performances are fantastic, but I think his, especially for the kind of idea that we have of Shia LaBeouf, is really nice. Like he just gives this very sober, thoughtful, empathetic performance. I mean, he is a little bit of a, he has these hot-headed tendencies, and he has this kind of backstory with his brother John Barenthal, who we're not gonna, I guess, ever talk to, but and I think that or at least the downside of the movie is that it doesn't really flesh out a lot of the things that it brings up. You have this kind of brother side plot with Shia's character that you get the sense that I guess they were in a car crash and the brother died and Shia lived and is kind of living with that regret. And they show you in flashbacks, but don't really dive into it too deeply. And then the only other problem I had is the movie kind of ends on a very... It feels very rushed. It feels very quick the way it kind of culminates, and but at the same time, I think that the ride that it takes you on and the chemistry between Gotagson and Shia LaBeouf is really sweet. And so it's kind of one of those nice summer indies that probably will that will kind of fall through the cracks, but I see kind of maybe finding some life if it gets on Hulu or Amazon or one of the streaming platforms. I think people who find it will really enjoy it. Lindsay, you mentioned that you saw this on the festival circuit, so I'm curious. It's probably been a while, but what did you make of Peanut Butter Falcon?
Yeah, I really liked it. I feel like my criticisms of it were pretty similar to yours. I was really charmed by the whole story of how it got made. I think it was like Tyler Nilson and Michael Schwartz, the filmmakers, had written the script with the thought that they would create this role for their friend who has Down syndrome and really wanted to be an actor. And then I think the story was that they DM'd it to Shia LaBeouf and he liked it and kind of made the film happen. Does that sound right to you? Do you know anything about this? I might be messing it up.
I believe so. I feel bad because I talked to the directors for an interview, but it was strictly like about Savannah stuff, so we didn't dive too much into the into the making of it. But yeah, they seem to be very kind of DIY filmmakers. Tyler Nilson is from the Outer Banks in North Carolina, where this is set, and so it seems like it was one of those. I think your story is correct.
It might,
kind
but
of
we
just
don't hear about it because they don't
happen from there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine having like the guts to just Instagram DM some big deal my script and saying like, here, this is worthy of reading. Spend your time on it.
I'm surprised that doesn't happen more often, honestly.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point.
Cause maybe that's why a lot of directors aren't on Twitter or anything, because they don't want to be like, okay, like I can just see Edgar Wright getting like DMs of like, it's like Shaun of the Dead, but he's just like, yeah, it's Baby Driver, but it's an actual baby driving, and he's just like, oh, okay.
Like Baby Driver was good, but here, read this. You're like, all right.
No, I'm glad you responded to it well also, because it's a very sweet movie. I think that it kind of has that, or at least the thought I kind of went in was it kind of has that Sundancey, like one of those movies that comes out of, one of the early film festivals. People kind of praise it, but it seems to kind of lose its luster throughout the year as more movies come out, and it seems to be more of this kind of independent festival circuit movie. And I think it has qualities of that, but I think it also is able to, like I said, the performances by the two leads, with Shia LaBeouf and Zach Atags, are very like their chemistry is fantastic, and it's very sweet, and so I think it kind of transcends that label of just being this kind of Sundance indie movie.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, like when I saw it, I was watching so many other movies, as is the case when you're at a festival. So I liked it. I was like, oh, that was great. And then I forgot about it, though, a week later. So I don't know what that says, but I did enjoy it in the moment.
Yeah, well, it's one of those, with festivals, you're watching so much stuff that you forget probably half of it just because of the amount of things you're being hit with. So I don't think it's too much of an indictment on the movie. Well, cool. Yeah, Peanut Butter Falcon, it's in theaters now. I think it's pretty much around the country, so if you're able to see it and you kind of want something light, kind of fun, I would recommend checking it out. But Lindsay, I'm going to toss it over to you. You had a movie that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So this movie is called South Mountain, and the director is Hilary Brower. It came out this year. It's a pretty small little indie. I saw it at a women's film festival in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is where I live. And I really liked it because it was very quiet about this older woman named Lila, played by Talia Balsam. She's in her maybe like 50s. Her marriage is sort of crumbling. Her husband, played by Scott Cohen, who Gilmore fans would know as Max Medina, is sort of like a philandering loser who has kids with different women, and you're just kind of set up to think he's sort of disgusting, but you don't hate him. And so she's kind of coping with his repeated infidelity, her life changing, just kind of everything she thought she knew is shifting and becoming something else. And it was definitely low budget, but really just kind of the type of movie that I didn't think much of in the moment. I liked it, but it carried with me, and I thought about it for like months after I saw it, or I guess a month after I saw it. This was like in July. So it's been one of those ones I keep coming back to, and I don't know when it is going to be available. I don't know if it has a distributor or anything, but I really want to rewatch it because I think there's something kind of masterful in the briefness of it, and I just remember really liking the way it was structured. It's one of those things that I think deserves a closer look because the filmmaker's doing more stuff than I'm picking up on with first watch. So That one is South Mountain. The director's Hilary Brower.
Cool. Yeah. We were looking at it, and I would recommend people checking out your review that you have on your blog, because there's this wonderful picture of Dennis Rodman that you get a little ways down that kind of throws you off. But it seems like like this very, it gets kind of tossed in that kind of quiet, unassuming movie kind of ilk, that doesn't really seem to get talked about, because it just doesn't have the I guess the intangibles that would make people want to like talk about it extensively. But just reading through your review of it, it seemed like that it was something that, yeah, like you said, it just really, it kind of sits with you. It's just kind of that perfect movie to kind of allow you to think and feel and connect with the characters on screen.
Yeah, and it's got a little bit of that Wanda quality. Like, I almost saw the Talia Balsam character as being a little bit connected to Wanda spiritually. Like, they share some commonalities, so I think it's sort of in the same vein. So if you like Wanda, you may like this movie. It's not as depressing, but it's sort of some of the same problems explored through this older woman in a different place.
Well, that's too bad, because we wanted some more depressing.
Who doesn't love that stuff?
Who doesn't love that stuff? Cool. Well, hopefully that gets a larger distribution soon. But yeah, South Mountain, check it out. We're going to take a short break. We're going to talk about Wanda, and I'm sure make people very sad while we're talking about it, because it's dealing with a lot of different issues, in part 2 after this break.
Hey Cinematariats, this is your co-host Lydia Creech with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we definitely want your money. We still want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema, but now we're getting into the Patreon game, baby. We've brought on a lot of new voices to contribute to the site, and we want to honor our responsibility to compensate all these smart people for their hard work. To help us out, head over to patreon.com/cinematary to sign up at the $5 a month level. In exchange, our patrons will get an exclusive bonus episode every month, weekly shoutouts on each episode of the show, and the ability to dictate a movie for us to cover eventually. If money's tight, we get it. There are still a few things you can do that we would greatly appreciate. First, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. That's free to help us reach more listeners. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send an email to Zach@cinematary.com. That's Zach, Z-A-C-H, to let us know your thoughts, and we will read them out and respond to them on future episodes. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions we put out every week. So, to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, share with your friends and family, and sign up to be a patron. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening, and now back to the show.
Right or wrong.
And we are back with part 2 of episode 262 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1970s Wanda. I promise this was not laziness, but with Lindsay here, and I think going through her essay as well as some of the stuff that she linked in her essay, I've decided not to go with the info sheet, and because I think a lot of the behind the scenes and impact that Wanda had both on Barbara Loden's career as well as what happened afterwards, well, I think that's all going to filter through this conversation that we have about this character in this movie and her performance. It seems very intertwined, especially just kind of reading through a lot of stuff. So I kind of want to just jump in and discuss everybody's thoughts. This was my first time seeing this movie, and honestly, I think I initially came away kind of struggling to kind kind of figure out how I felt about the movie. It's funny, Lindsay, that you mentioned Jean Dielman as like the kind of as like the spiritual sequel kind of to it, because that was another one that I don't think I really latched onto initially on the first watch. But I reread your essay, and then I read some of the stuff that you had linked to, and I kind of I think I gained some appreciation. I'm excited to kind of watch it again. And so I wanted to start off by kind of tossing it over to you to talk a little bit about when you wrote the essay, which was, I think, 2 years ago after the first time you watched it. And I don't know, has your experience with Wanda expanded since then? Or, I mean, what was that first time like? And I guess what has happened in terms of you in that film afterwards?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first time I saw it, I was thinking about Wanda through my own personal lens, right? Because she's sort of a character who is a bit of an enigma. Like, she describes herself as kind of being nothing and no one, and so I think that makes it easy for you to see her through your own personal experience and your own personal lens. So the first time I watched this movie, I was thinking a lot about depression and how it just seemed like Wanda was struggling with massive depression that nobody was talking about and nobody was helping her with. And it had just gotten to the point where she didn't give a shit about what happened to her. She was just kind of letting life happen and sitting there passively because she couldn't muster up the care. She just had no fucks to give. And so I think that's kind of how I read it the first time. And then, you know, I read A Suite for Barbara Loden, this really great kind of short essay novella about the movie, and have read some other critical pieces about it. And, you know, I think now I feel like there are more ways to read her, not just through that frame of this woman struggling with depression, but, you know, there's the whole what Barbara Loden personally was going through at the time, which is something Suite for Barbara Loden talks about a lot. You know, the feminist movement that was kind of kicking up, and how that was seen culturally. I think there are a lot of different ways to frame her and to think about her story and how it fits in. So I would say my read on it has changed a little bit with each time I've watched it.
Yeah, I definitely want to come back to the point of the feminist reaction to it, because it was interesting reading about like I mentioned before, John Dielman in this one, which one of those films was, you know, seen as this feminist masterpiece, while the other, Wanda, was very much kind of, you know, looked down upon and kind of squandered for many years until it kind of had this revival. But Dylan, had you seen this movie before the episode? I'm curious about your reaction to Wanda.
Yeah, this is the second time I've seen it. I saw it 2 years ago. I believe there was like a short period where it was on Filmstruck, and I noticed that and just decided to watch it. I can't remember if it was a part of collection or anything else. And then lo and behold, for whatever reason, the timing on that, the podcast You Must Remember This ended up doing an episode about Barbara Loden specifically, and her specifically surrounding Wanda, but it kind of encompassed her whole career, getting to New York and meeting Elia Kazan, eventually being able to make Wanda after her theater career, and then everything after that. So that was kind of my context for that. I would say I appreciated it more this time around. The way the movie meanders, I couldn't quite connect with, and then I got a jolt of it when I realized it was slowly becoming a crime caper. And that got me, and it was really surprising. But this time around, with more context and having an idea of where the movie was going to go, this time around, I felt like I caught a lot more smaller pieces of how the movie was slowly built, that made me appreciate it more this time around.
Yeah, it's, and I think that's probably where I was kind of hitting a wall with it initially. Is you assume, and I guess this is just kind of my I chalked it up thinking about it later to like my guy brain reaction to the movie. But a lot of this film is about the cycles that she's kind of hitting in, and I've been doing a lot of thinking and looking at the kind of cyclical ways that communities get stuck and are unable to kind of break out of it, and how people react to it in a way that, oh, this, you should, whether it's if you're homeless, oh, you should just buck up and get a job, something like that. Or if there's, a high crime population, it's like, oh, it's their fault. There's they're just criminals. There's no reason why. There's no other reason why they'd be doing this. And it's tough to kind of put yourself in the shoes of that person and make a conscious effort to accept and learn about the systems in place that they just have no ability to kind of break out of. And so in Wanda, it's interesting because as I can see why maybe it was rejected initially by kind of feminist critics, because you kick off this movie and she's just kind of meandering around, is supposed to be in court where she's fighting for custody of her kids and along with her husband, and kind of just shows up and and just kind of dismissively allows him to take custody of them. And I think in that moment, thinking back on it, it does allow her to kind of gain this freedom in her life to an extent. But at the same time, I think I'm thinking of like the framing of that as like this female character, at least in the societal structures, you would see it as like this. I mean, it's almost kind of this aghast moment. You're just like, why would she just completely deject herself from her marriage and from her children, especially? But as you kind of go along, you see that she just is unable to break away from from this cycle that she's kind of stuck in. I don't know. I think that's probably one of the reasons it's hard for people to connect with this movie, at least initially, because there is a lot of that, and I think that it takes a lot of thinking on your own end to kind of, or at least for me, to kind of figure out and understand what Barbara Loden is trying to say with this character. Did you all kind of run into any of that while watching it?
I was just gonna say that's kind of why I connected to it. I think I really like this idea of this woman just kind of being like, this isn't what I wanted, and I got myself into this situation because it was the societally mandated thing to do, and oh no, I can't handle this, like I can't do it. And so it's kind of interesting to just see her passively say, no, take them away, like they're better off without me. I'm gonna just wander through life as I am because I can't do anything else. And so it kind of gives you a hook into where she's at mentally and emotionally, and kind of gives you some insight into what she may be struggling with, although like we as a viewer don't really know exactly, kind of have to surmise. But that's kind of what I took away from it.
Yeah, to your point, the way Barbara Loden immediately like sets up her character is interesting for that, setting up the context, where we slowly like find out that we're kind of in a coal mining town, and we come into a house that we don't know. We see an old lady looking out a window, and everybody waking up for the day, and a lot of screaming kids, and we just see this woman come up, go to the kitchen, look like either about to feed the baby, whatever, make coffee. And I forgot how this movie opened. It's like, well, wait, where's Barbara Loden? And then she's on the couch towards the front of the house while the the man who has to go to work or whatever storms out looking mad. And her first line is like, I think he's mad at me. And it was just the fact that, I think a normal or obvious way to set up the movie and her character would be just her in that position, meaning like her being the wife having to take care of the kids and that being, but we're already kind of stripped away and seeing her alienated from it by us seeing this family already working. And I think it's probably like her sister, I believe, I think is what the credits say at the end. Because we don't really get a clear understanding of her relationship with those people because they come and go really quickly. But just to set up the context of what we eventually find out is her character, because then after that, we see what we find out is her husband going to work and saying, I have to go to court, yelling at, his whatever coworker, and eventually finding out that they end up meeting in court, and that's divorce proceedings. But the fact that it was like a slow, like isolated build that we don't immediately assume that that's, or I thought that was what her character was going to be, that we find out she's already outside of it and that she's trying to get out of it. And in this case, going to her sister's house to get away from her family. But yet she's still kind of stuck in that same environment, right? So then she has to keep going further outside of Carbondale and Cold Town. So
I would have loved to hear a conversation between her and her sister, right? Because what must her sister and her husband think of Wanda? We never find out. They never really say anything. So
right.
It's just, I think about that all the time. I wish there had been some kind of scene like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we only get like the suggestion of like the husband, or not her husband, but her sister's husband, like being gruff, storming out of the door. It's just like, I guess, yeah, she's mad, or he's mad at her, for being there and not being with her own family. I don't know. So, but you're right. We like immediately get out of that environment. So as you say, it kind of leaves a space for her being an enigma, where we only get suggestions of where she came from before she goes out in her wandering.
Well, I think that the other difficult thing, talking, it's the point of her relationship with other people, is how Loden decides to kind of show us, but at the same time not show us the clear mental health problems that Wanda has. And, I was thinking while reading stuff earlier today about how other movies, have to show you in some cinematic fashion that somebody is depressed. It's kind of like when people do drugs in movies, like you have to have this whole moment that it's pretty much the movie going, they're doing drugs now. It's like you have to have a thing that says they're depressed now. There has to be some sort of music playing and some sort of reaction from the character. And in this, it's so unassuming and it's so kind of subdued that I think I can see how people wouldn't find that reading and immediately accuse her of being negligent and selfish and awful, when at the same time she is struggling with with her relationships with all of these people, because she has there clearly is this inner turmoil inside of her that is making it difficult to have any sort of communication. And you kind of find that out along the road as she meets other men and meets other people, and then eventually meets Mr. Dennis, who she follows along for the rest of the movie. But it just the kind of transitory nature of the relationships and how she goes about it, you just don't initially get that. And so I think that's really interesting, the way that the film's kind of set up and at first, because she's presented in societal fashion so horrid. Like she would be the bad, it's almost like the bad person. You're following that person the entire time, when again that goes back to the point I was making earlier, that it's difficult to, I don't know, I kind of appreciated this view of depression, because it's not, when people are actually dealing with depression, it's not like you have this incredibly cinematic moment that goes, I'm depressed, and the music plays. And so it was just a really interesting choice that Loden made to be dealing with that throughout the narrative, but also not bringing attention to it necessarily, if that makes any sense.
Sad too that it seems some of it gets chalked up in her characterization, or at least how people around her are reacting to her, that they might just see her as dumb, or a dumb blonde, and that like her being depressed would, or even that conception of her would never enter their mind, because they would only see her in that one way, and they would just chalk it up to that and then move on with their lives. So because a lot of the interactions building up to like her trying to get her job back because she finds out she didn't actually have that much money to actually leave Carbondale and actually get out anywhere, that even her $24 that she thought she was going to get for the seamstress job that barely paid anything was actually $9 after taxes. And that she, of course, asked if there's any more work she could do. They were looking for people. And they're like, no, you're too slow. You can't, we don't need you. I mean, we need people, but you're too slow. And that's all there is to it. And, after a while, she just kind of stands there. It seems like stunned. And eventually she says, thank you. And like kind of leaves. I mean, cause at that point there's not, I don't know. I mean, to your point, Zach, or that might actually be like a kind of depression that could not work their way out. So all there is to tacitly accept what's going on and then just kind of move on to the next thing. In that case of her leaving town. So
and that's why I said I thought that she made a really interesting decision about it, because it's that's not a form of depression that is, for lack of a better phrase, like cinematically viable. Like that doesn't come across on the screen very well. And so I think it
does. It's just like in the margins of the frame.
Yeah.
It's like you have to, as Lindsay said, you like suss it out, or you feel it after you surmise it throughout the whole film, and you're like, oh, geez, okay.
Well, I think one other thing is like she has such low self-esteem that she kind of just believes whatever anybody tells her.
Man. Right.
There's that one scene where I can't remember what. It might be after they go shopping or something. And Mr. Dennis tells her, you're stupid. And she repeats it back to him like it's a fact immediately. Like, I'm stupid. Okay. Yep, that's what I am because you said it and it must be true because that's all I have to go off of. So I think it's just her responding to how people treat her and internalizing it. And then that just becomes a part of how she sees herself and who she is in the world.
And I think that might be a good way to transition into talking a little bit about Barbara Loden and her life. Specifically, as Dylan alluded to earlier, she's in New York. She meets up and correct me if I'm wrong, that she's married to Elia Kazan, correct?
She was his mistress for a long time. I can't remember what year exactly, but it was further into the 60s before they actually got married, that Elia Kazan was married to somebody before, and that she died from, I'm going to get it wrong, it's some kind of embolism that she died of. And I think that was like 64. And Barbara Loden was married to somebody also. But so they carried on an affair for a long time. And then once Kazan, lost his wife, that she kind of put it down after, she got divorced from her husband prior, that it's like, well, either we're going to get married or we're not. And it kind of, if that's a way to frame that situation, that's kind of where they were sitting at. And I from the things that I've heard about it has only gotten more tense or more ridiculous in terms of how tenuous the relationship was to each other going forward from the 60s. And I think they first specifically met in a like more collaborative artistic sense is when Kazan casted her in Arthur Miller's After the Fall, and that is like couched in Miller trying to reconcile broader historical problems of the Holocaust and also him losing Marilyn Monroe and Marilyn Monroe's death and him grieving through it, and Barbara Loden taking on what is essentially, or even at the time was said more or less, Marilyn Monroe's part or role as a character, and that her playing it. And Barbara Loden insists that she couldn't do it if she was just doing a parody of Marilyn Monroe, that's like she connected to the character herself, that there was actually something in there that she responded to and that made sense to her, and that anybody's projection of Marilyn Monroe onto the character was happenstance for Barbara Loden now. So I don't know, at that point, since I haven't ever seen a production of After the Fall, but just hearing about it, that seemed to carry it's like her myth and Barbara Loden's image going forward of her being that kind of character, that kind of actor, having to push back against that. And I think in this case, in this movie, to your point, Zach, about parts of it being quote unquote entirely uncinematic, of like trying to drain of that image or that certain kind of potential for glamorizing of it. So
yeah, and Lindsay, maybe you can speak a little bit more to it, but I think the other project that she took another project with Elia Kazan as well, and then of course he has comments after Wanda was made, kind of dismissing the film, and I forgot where's I think you have it in your review, where is it? She was but after Wanda, she no longer needed to be that way, no longer wore clothes that dramatized her lure, no longer came on as frail, uncertain woman who depended on men who had the power. I realized I was losing her, but I was also losing interest in her struggle. And was complaining that she was careless about managing the house. And so, what did you come across when you were looking up stuff about Elia Kazan and Barbara Loden's relationship, especially after Wanda?
Oh man, well, I mean, it seemed like he definitely did not want her to be successful. He said some nice things about her. I can't remember any offhand, but it seemed kind of like he just really didn't want her to succeed. Like, I know there was some talk about his movie The Arrangement and Barbara Loden really wanting the role that ended up going to Faye Dunaway, and that causing a lot of tension in their relationship because, you know, she kind of felt like that was her role. It was based on her, so why did he not let her play it? So it kind of seemed like Wanda, in a way, was her response to that. Like, if you won't let me play myself, I will write my own thing to bring myself into existence.
And particularly to your point that she's gone on to say after releasing Wanda, besides I'm sure wanting to direct other movies, this one having a ridiculously crummy reception in America, that the way she was talking about trying to pick roles as an actress at that point, didn't see the characters that she actually wanted to play. And so, I think through the 70s, she was mostly an acting teacher after this movie came out, and putting on stage productions. But in terms of like, what could she have done as an actress after Wanda? I don't know. It seems like, sadly, we would never find out. And I think part of it is, having to push back and find her own roles, even insofar as having to make a movie for herself, like an entire movie to build a part for herself to play. So
I'm curious, Lindsay, just kind of when you were learning more about the film and more about Barbara Loden, I mean, what did you make of the feminist criticisms that were made about Wanda and kind of how that film was read in that context when it came out in the 70s?
Well, I mean, I think there was just a lot of the opinion of she is so passive and she lets men do whatever to her and she's not taking any autonomy for herself. Like, she's not controlling her own narrative. But I mean, I think a lot of that read definitely comes from a lack of understanding about what's going on with Wanda's mental health, right? So I think leaving that part of it out of the conversation makes it easy to read her as just this, passive kind of opinionless person, when really there's so much more that is probably going on that's gotten her to this place. And I think also it's kind of recognizing the place where she grew up and her situation and how it's so different from, a lot of other women who are middle class or upper class. Like, it's just completely different for her. There's kind of nowhere for her to go, even if she was putting in the effort. So I think it's just a little bit of a limited way of thinking about her and her options and why she does the thing she does, and putting a lot of what feels to me like bourgeois thinking onto it and onto her, when that's not who that character is at all.
To your point, I've heard Loden even phrase the character in that character's situation, Wanda's situation, of I can easily imagine myself becoming that if I didn't, in her case, happen to go to New York and being able to be a model for a while and eventually get acting roles, that she could imagine herself getting a job at Woolworth's, which has a cameo in this movie, also, and just working there and basically playing a version of Wanda, but is actually her real life. And it's deeply depressing to think about, but then, of course, makes so much sense of why Loden felt compelled to make this movie.
Oh, I was just going to say, I grew up in the Pittsburgh area, and I was actually just talking about our neighbor growing up to my mom earlier and saying she reminded me of Wanda because she was kind of that type of woman where she, like, just got into a horrible marriage, became an alcoholic, couldn't get it together, just everything kind of fell apart for her, and then subsequently her entire family. So I was kind of saying, like, hey, if I didn't leave, this could have happened to me because it happened to this woman who was right next door. And you know, it's a more backwards place to grow up than, you know, on either of the coasts.
Yeah, and I think that's what also challenges you while watching this, is that it is something that can be a cycle that people that you can fall into, that you don't even realize that you know, at first she seems to be like kind of out searching for this sense of security, or at least the sense of what she's supposed to do, and then when, you know, she can't find any security at all, as she's kind of, you know, floundering around, for a lack of a better phrase, until she finds Mr. Dennis and just kind of goes, this is my structure now. You know, I think that anybody can kind of fall into that loop where you're just trying to grab a hold of something because you don't have any answers for what you're looking for, and so it's the kind of cliche of you fall into this and you wake up one day and realize what happened, and I think that you know, that plays kind of into that the final sequence of the film where she's sitting in that bar smoking the cigarette, and you have that freeze frame image that just kind of, I don't know, there's so much said just on her face as that freeze frame sits there. What did you all make of that kind of final sequence that happens?
Oh, it deeply depressed me. It made me think of like my early 20s and how much I identified with that feeling of just being there but not really being there, and not really understanding how you got to this point, or who these people are, or why you're supposed to care about them or anything. Just and it was a really long freeze frame too. I
mean, in that specific sequence too. Yeah. Oh man, like through the credits. And that specific lead up to that final freeze frame, for a good minute, she's just standing outside of what sounds like a bar, and then it takes a woman who is going upstairs, I guess she lives upstairs, getting a pack of cigarettes or something, to come back down to see her still standing there, and then inviting her inside, and then, you know, giving her a drink, and they keep trying to feed her, give her a cigarette, and it's like this whole thing to try to, you know, I don't know, bring her into the revelry, but she's just like in her own isolated state. Of course, them having no idea what she's been through. And so they're just doing these kind of, I don't want to say superficial, because it is trying to be communal and friendly at the same time. But, you know, considering all that we watched going up to, you know, her being roped into a bank robber job that falls on its face almost immediately. And that, you know, whatever messed up relationship that she ended up developing with Mr. Dennis here, that by the end of it, again, without that at least, you know, sense of something, if not structure or whatever else, of holding on to it, that again, she's left to wander. And for whatever reason, the first time I watched it, I thought she actually walked all the way home. But this time I was like, wait, okay, this is the scene. Okay, no, oh, fuck, she's just there at a bar, and who knows what's going to happen to her, right? Like, she's still basically by herself. She's currently with these people, but it is entirely an ambiguous ending about where Barbara will be after this night of drinking and smoking and eating a hot dog. So,
well, also it's just she's It's almost like, even though it was not in any way the ideal situation when she was following around, or at least attached herself to Mr. Dennis, she kind of got back in the cycle that she had with her husband and her kids after kind of wandering around for a period of time. And so also I think that realization of she's back wandering again kind of just slumps through her body as she's sitting there, because it's like she's able to escape that system that she seems to always find herself in, but then once she finds that breakaway, that dissipates very quickly, and she's back in the system once more. It's just like, how am I ever going to break out of this this loop of finding some sort of structure, whatever it may be, good or bad, and then finding myself wandering around once again and just kind of bouncing from man to man and place to place.
Yeah, in your essay, Lindsay, I liked the point that you got to. I mean, particularly her relationships to men up through and including Mr. Dennis, that before she got to Mr. Dennis, they would try to... There's that one sequence in that motel where that guy was trying to be as quiet as he could be to not wake her up, and to just slink in there, get his shoes on, and get his suitcase, and of course, he knocks into it. And then wakes her up, and she's immediately like scurrying to just like put her clothes on and get her stuff together to like follow this guy out. And of course, that guy eventually just, I guess, says, "Hey, go get some ice cream." And just, it's this long shot, and we just see the car driving up to the, ice cream place, and her getting out to get a cone. And then the guy immediately like dishes her and drives off. But your point in the essay, Lindsay, of calling it like a survival instinct, where it's like, at all these points, that's just what it is. It's like what she's clinging on to. It's how she's responding to her situation, in this survivalist way that I really appreciated.
Yeah, she's just trying to do whatever she can to have a place to sleep and a little bit of money. I think, too, it's interesting that the last time she sees Mr. Dennis, like, he's treated her like garbage the entire time, but the last interaction they have together is a positive one, where he compliments her for the way that she handles that bank teller initial sequence. So it's this one positive moment of reinforcement, and then he gets killed.
So right, like, he has this whole plan of going to this, I guess, the bank manager's house, giving them a bomb to his family, like sitting a fake bomb on top of them. It's like, hey, we're going to do this in about an hour and a half. And the guy immediately gets into a struggle, the bank manager does, with Mr. Dennis, drops a gun, and like, she immediately has the presence of mind to snag the gun, fend off and tell the bank manager to let him go. And right, to your point of just that, we only see them like smile maybe 2 or 3 times at most in this movie, but that is like the first time we actually see Wanda smile, and it just, like, outside of more like, playful smiling or something like that, but actually like seemed to like generally be happy in like reaction to something, of someone saying something like a compliment to her. And you're right, Lindsay. That messes me up.
Gutted me.
Any final thoughts on Wanda as we kind of wind down? We talked a little bit about her, just the kind of portion of the film where it's her and Mr. Dennis, and in the kind of toxic relationship that those two have. I mean, what he's kind of presented as this kind of grifting petty thief. I don't know. What did you make of him as a character? I mean, I don't think anybody's supposed to. I guess you can kind of understand why she would latch on to him, because again, it kind of goes back to the point we were talking about, that she's trying to find something in order to latch on to. But I don't know. What would you all make of his character that would at least give her, some small amount of thought to go, yeah, this is the guy I'm going to follow?
Oh, I don't know. There's really nothing redeeming about him at all.
Other than that one nice compliment.
Right, at the very end.
I mean, to the point that, like, she stumbles onto the situation. Well, right, but that... but how she even meets him is like he's in the middle of robbing a bar and she's just stumbling in to, get a drink and something to eat and to tell probably someone her story so far, right? And it just happens to be Mr. Dennis. And I mean, to me though, for how his character actually plays out and how Loden frames and write his character, I was kind of amazed that they went so far as to actually introduce his father to us at the end, like right before he actually pulls the bank robbery job, that they actually spend a moment to, where I guess his dad works at some wild, Holy Land church that includes catacombs. I do not know what's going on there, but like his dad works there and there's this whole sequence of, I guess him trying to have a, I'm doing good dad moment where, he's like, after I do this, I'll get a job. Because the only thing his dad, like, half is articulating to him, or even when he's speaking to him about, is whether or not he has a job, or if he has a good job, and if he does it. And it seems like from that conversation that he's done, theft and things before to get by. And the dad seems to have a sense of it, but Mr. Dennis here is just telling him, like, give me a week and I'll have a good job and it'll be good and it'll be good to go. And I mean, to be honest, I was amazed that they even, that Loden went so far in the characterization. And I mean, as much as he's a crummy character, it speaks to her as a director and writer that they went so far to even build that right at the end of some weird sympathetic note or something. It's very strange.
I wondered too, like, what did you guys make of him taking medicine those couple of times? It was like Wanda called him out for a headache or something, but you see him using a bottle a couple of different times. What did you think? Something was wrong with him? I almost thought like maybe he has some kind of terminal illness or something.
Yeah, good question. I mean, for a stretch there, I just, the amount of times, like, do you still got a headache? Wanda's character kept asking him over and over again. But to your point, now that you mention it, I think he might have a heart condition or something, because the amount that he keeps downing those bears, right? That it's just like some form of pain alleviation that goes far beyond just having a headache. So, I mean, I guess that's a more bit of enigma to his character. And also just how old he is, right? He must be in at least late 40s, 50s, right? With the amount of gray hair. And that one character that we meet that I guess was supposed to be the driver for the job, for the bank robbery job. And the guy's like, no, I am like waiting for my kid and I have very little to begin with. And the little I have, I want to actually keep before I die. And it's just like this really like depressing moment of him, like, trying to set up his team to then rob the bank. But yet he decides to go on and do it himself with with Wanda, whereas, can you drive? Okay. And she's like, I could drive well enough, or, and he immediately like pulls the car over to the side of the road and gets her to drive. And it's this whole sequence. But at that point, clearly the pathetic desperation of this job that this guy is dead set on, as you say, Lindsay, might indicate some kind of terminal state for him to have to pull it off.
Yeah, and in that scene, Wanda's like curled up in the fetal position, sleeping.
Oh, right. Just bored, probably. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just tired of being on the road. She was driving all up until that point.
I think it also kind of illustrates, and it doesn't in any way like vindicate him as a character, but I think that the scene with his father, as well as just the amount of medicine he's taking, shows that he is dealing with as much internally probably as her, and is probably is also a product of systems that were put in place against him as well, because it doesn't seem like his dad is the most like warm, cuddly figure of all time, and maybe that's just kind of worn off after years and years of his kind of thievery and grifting. But I think it's kind of showing that to an extent, but at the same time, it's not like you don't feel that much sympathy for him, because at the same time he's kind of fully engrossed himself in this and just this terrible persona that he's become.
I mean, I guess just the last point that I have knocking around here, I just kind of want to talk about the camera work and kind of how it gets used in just creating this matter-of-fact reality of this movie, where everything happens like it's a lot of it is natural lighting, right? So it's like it feels like you're just watching almost a near documentary. And a lot of times too, you either get really like tight close-ups inside cars, or sometimes really long lenses to where you have a lot of distance and you're just catching like faces. But there's a way that with that kind of style of shooting and editing it together in this matter-of-fact way that everything happens like her leaving and like literally her just like walking out, just starting to walk to the courthouse, I guess, at the very beginning of the movie. And then her like basically finding men to like either feed, give her a drink, or to like a place to sleep at night. That all these things like happen in such like they get edited in such a matter-of-fact way that us as an audience has to pick up the pieces and like build an understanding of what's going on. That I think with the kind of way that Loden and I can't remember the cinematographer's name decided to shoot this movie together and then edit together in such a way that it does. And to your point, Zach, that you brought up earlier, potentially being in a frustrating way, but it leads us to actually build an understanding of what this situation is for ourselves, as opposed to it necessarily being given to us.
All right. Well, again, Wanda is available on the Criterion collection, and you can watch it now on the Criterion channel. So if you're feeling up to it, give it a shot. Well, I believe that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Letterboxd, or on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all of the movies that we talked about in this episode. Also, be sure to, like I said at the top, we got a new film theory and chill on our Patreon page, patreon.com/Cinematary. We want to thank, though, our patrons now. Thank you so much to Cam, Chad Newsom, Christopher Metcalf, Eric Dukowski, Graham Jones, Harry Eskin, Maggie, Marie Barty, Matthew Lingo, Miranda Barnwall, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Rio Ross, and Will Carroll. Thank you so much for supporting the website and our writers. Next week, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1977's News from Home, and that will also be have a part one from live from Toronto, as Jessica, myself, and Andrew are heading to the Toronto International Film Festival. So we will have probably a rundown of some of the films I think that we have seen, or at least I think probably that I have seen up to that point, that they'll talk about stuff that they're excited to see. But be looking for some TIFF diaries over the next week and weekend from us on the podcast feed, and then also we'll probably have some extra stuff from TIFF on our Patreon page. So again, very much worth checking it out. But thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next week.